It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. Appreciate you joining with us. Thank you. There are a number of new folks I see joining with us today on our website. We are streaming our show live there for those of you that are outside of local geographic area. Thanks for joining with us. Appreciate you. We're going to tackle 4 different topics today, the start of which is going to be the presidential lies. You know, the news that's out about Obamacare and the fact that the president deftly but obviously lied is the talk of the media. There is actually some mainstream media that is holding the president at least somewhat accountable. However, I've noticed that there are a lot of people that are, while they can't deny that it's occurred, they're giving him a pass, shall we say, by utilizing language that any critical thinker will look at and say, wow, wait a minute, stop right there. This is completely unacceptable. So a good example, and I'll get into a couple of examples about that. There was an article out there by Ron Fournier, which I find to be especially disturbing, from the National Journal. Anyway, we're going to talk about that in a moment. Our second topic will be Defrauding America. The amount of fraud that is enveloped in the entitlement programs in the United States of America is so stunning, ladies and gentlemen. I watched an episode last night with John Stossel on Fox News where he was interviewed by Bill O'Reilly. And, you know, a lot of you know that I got a problem with some of the stuff that Bill O'Reilly talks about. But John Stossel is a pretty good investigator in terms of digging up some of the dirt that's going on in there. And he's of a relatively libertarian, I should say, mindset. And so I'm going to play you that episode. It's about 5 minutes, 4.5 minutes, and I think it's worthwhile for you to hear. In addition to that, our third topic is going to be Nationalizing America. And the question there is, do we see totalitarianism in sight? There's an article out in reference to the student loan debt that is currently being held by the federal government. You know, since Barack Obama nationalized the student loan program, and now, of course, one has to arguably admit that he has nationalized the healthcare system. Although the liberal and progressives out there will scream bloody murder when they hear that, I don't really care. You can't deny where we're headed. But in this case, he's nationalized the student loan issue so that the government is the federal government is the only one who can lend student loans. And folks, it's up 463% under Obama. It went from $120 billion to $675 billion. We're on the hook for that as taxpayers, number one. And number two, again, it is a free market, free enterprise issue. There is only one lender of resort to go to, not lender of last resort, only one lender, period, to go to get student loans. And when we look at things like what transpired with the IRS and this kind of cronyism and special, I mean, will students be denied as we move forward a student loan because they have the wrong political viewpoint? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Our fourth and final topic will be Common Core. And there's a couple of great articles out about Common Core, one in the Wall Street Journal, one in the New American, about how they are trying to couch and pitch this as a state-led initiative. We're going to talk about that because it is anything but. And I tell you right now, 46 states out of 50 have adopted Common Core. So the odds are very high that your state is one of those. we're going to talk a little bit about that and understand a little bit about the issues of what Common Core is and who's behind it, because I think a lot of people hear Common Core, but they really don't understand it. So we're going to try to get into a little bit of that. Okay, if you'd like to call in on our hotline, if you're watching live and you'd like to call in, you're welcome to do so. The telephone number is area code 417-204-5141. That's 417-204-5141. For those of you who are listening to this on podcast, the entire show will be in one single podcast. I will not break it up into segments for you. Okay, so let's start and let's tackle our first topic here. The issue of the president's lying. And I got to tell you, this is a really serious and has very serious implications for the nation. What we're hearing is the papers that are out there that have been traditional supporters, the mainstream ministry of propaganda, if you will, are at this point unable to any longer contain the truth. In other words, there's just no way that they can shift and twist the language to suit their arguments and positions any longer, because they are no longer. I mean, it's so obvious to everyone what the lie was because it was caught so many times on tape. I've published on our website and on our Facebook page a number of the quotes that directly came from his mouth, and I got to tell you, folks, there's just no way to parse this any other way. You have to admit that what he was doing was a complete and utter falsification of the truth. And he knew it back in 2010. And his aides and his staff have admitted that they knew it. They actually had discussions to determine how far they wanted to go in public speaking engagements. And you know what? You cannot deny what all of the public record shows and exposes. And so even the sycophantic ministry of propaganda has to get out there and say, just for credibility's sake, yeah, he misrepresented the truth. Or in the New York Times case, misspoke. Well, with all due respect, you don't misspeak 29 times on videotape with emphatic statements like, no one can take that away from you. I mean, let's be honest, folks. That is not a statement that was made as an off-the-cuff remark that was a slip of the tongue or any other type of argument. You cannot make those assumptions, and you cannot get away with that kind of misrepresentation. The simple truth is that he knew what he was he knew what he was talking about, and he knew exactly what he was saying. And anyone who would want to argue the position is arguing against reality. So, what we need to do is take a look at what some of these people are saying. There's an article out there in the National Review. And, you know, this one's pretty good, actually, but I find some trouble with all of these. There's one out there by Ron Fournier in the National Journal. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, I will put the links to these stories in the actual description section so you can find these stories for yourself. That was a request from listeners, and I've been doing it. Any YouTube videos that you watch of us or me, you can find a link to the actual stories that I'm addressing or utilizing as fodder, if you will. So, okay, Fournier, by the way, used to be an ex-legislator. And so he comes out and he says it might seem impossible Obama could do more to harm his credibility. And I agree with the vast majority of this this article. In fact, he says in a speech Monday night to his political team, Obama said, let me start that again. Quote, now, if you have or had one of these plans before the Affordable Care Act came into law, and you really like that plan, what we said was you can keep it if it hasn't changed since the law passed. Fournier's response to that is absolutely no. That's not what the Obama administration said. What it did say, and this is an actual quote, given to the American Medical Association in June of 2009, which was actually before the passage of the act, okay? That means, this is President Obama speaking, that means that no matter how we reform health care, we will keep this promise to the American people. If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan, period. No one will take it away no matter what. Then he made a second statement after the bill was signed in April of 2010 in Portland, Oregon. And he said, if you like your insurance plan, you will keep it. No one will be able to take that away from you. It hasn't happened yet. It won't happen in the future. Okay. So with those two verbatim statements out of the horse's mouth out there into the public sphere, there is no deniability to the issue. Even the Washington Post, which is typically a more left-leaning paper, gave the 4 Pinocchios, which is how they rate lies, and there's only 4. So when you get 4, you're pretty much construed to be an absolute liar. Here's my problem with this, and this is where the critical thinking skills for each of you will come in. Towards the tail end of this story, he talks about the fact that they reinvented history, and they actually had discussions because they were afraid that the public wouldn't understand the issue, and they basically agreed in advance that they were going to misrepresent the facts. Okay, but here's where the problem is. The last paragraph of this story, this is where it all goes south. On history, and this is Ron Fournier speaking now, or writing. On history's scale of deception, this one leaves a light footprint. Worse lies have been told by worse presidents, leading to more severe consequences. And you could argue that withholding a caveat is more a sin of omission. But this president is toying with a fragile commodity, his credibility. Once Americans stop believing in Obama, they will stop listening to him, they won't trust government to manage health care, and they will wonder what happened to the reform-minded leader who promised never to lie to them. Okay, let's stop right there. The problem is that what he's doing is he is using an age-old tactic, which is to admit the fault, but then limit the damage as a result of that by saying, but it's really not that big a deal. I agree with the entire article, except for that last paragraph, because while he admits the obvious and details the, quote, long train of abuses related to this monstrosity called Obamacare, the author then goes around and tries to soft pedal the implication that leaves the reader with the impression that, well, it's all okay then, because other presidents have done worse. Okay, that's a problem in and of itself. Because, you can't sit there and say because other presidents have done worse. That's like drawing the conclusion that you can say it's okay because someone else has done a worse thing, and you're really basically arguing that because someone else has done something bad, you can point to that and use that as an excuse for why your bad behavior is okay. So here's my point. Fournier comes on very strong, rightly so. But then he drops the ball at the end of the argument or at the end of the article, offering, a getaway, because he just spent the last 9 paragraphs trapping the rat, right? But then he lets it walk away unscathed. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say you need to read articles and educate yourself utilizing critical thinking skills. You must. It's absolutely imperative that you understand what that author is attempting to impart. In other words, he's giving you information. And in this article, he gives you lots of information and all the information that you need in order to create, for all intents and purposes, an informed decision about the behavior, right? But what you have to recognize is not only what they're actually giving you factually, but the implications of what they're saying. And bias comes in all sorts of forms. This is an easy exercise for anyone who is a student of critical thinking. Because if you read this, you'll understand exactly what that means. Worse lies have been told by worse presidents, leading to more severe consequences. That you could argue that withholding a caveat is more a sin of omission? Hold on, stop right there. This was a lie of commission, not a lie of omission. And, if you're just casually reading this, you may not pick that up. That's why I tell you it's so critically important for you to understand and recognize when you are being misled. The propaganda aspect is interleaved, and it's not done so in an obvious way. The progressives and the liberals in many cases will. But when you got a guy like Fournier, who allegedly comes from a position of conservatism or moderate conservatism, you got to be careful what you're reading. Because this was a lie of commission, not a lie of omission. There's a big difference there. Fournier actually should and does know the difference. What this is nothing but a propaganda piece that's been submitted as excoriating on the issue, right, on the issue of the lie, but it wears a thin veil of acquiescence to a crime that arguably implies and qualifies this president for impeachment. Now, that's a bold and hard statement, and I'm going to back it up, and I'll tell you why. There are those who will say, well, wait a second, this doesn't carry the same weight as a Benghazi or a Fast and Furious. Nobody died. I beg to differ. The truth of the matter is, this is a far greater issue than you're giving it credibility for, if that's your argument. And the reason I say that is because when you utilize that argument, you're assuming, one, that the damage is already done and there won't be any more. That's a mistake. Number one, we're talking about a huge swath of our economy, and literally somewhere plus or minus 100 million Americans are going to be negatively affected by this. In other words, they're going to lose their insurance. They're going to have to re-sign up under the new plans. It's going to cost everybody a ton of money. And in the meantime, we don't know how many people are actually going to die, and I'll tell you why. We won't know that until we start seeing people who have lost their insurance but don't have new insurance to sign up for after January 1st or can no longer afford that insurance. And now they will be dropping off like flies because they have chronic health ailments that cannot survive without constant medical care and treatment. So this is the truth of the matter is that this is an absolute misrepresentation of the reality of the situation. And I don't want anybody to mistake that point. This is a lie of commission, and therefore it falls under the category of impeachable offenses. You know, we impeached President Bill Clinton for, lying about his personal sexcapades. Well, let me tell you something. The implications of this are far greater. And I got to tell you, there's other aspects of this that are even more important. No one's talking about the fact that here you have a modern law that is forcing you. This is a law now passed by Congress and approved by the Supreme Court, which is forcing you to abandon your Fourth Amendment right to privacy, number one, because you are forced under duress to submit an application. You're forced under the duress of law, police power of law. And so when an agency, or in this case, the HHS, or the nation, as an example, has a law that forces you under duress to submit this information, then you are first and foremost violating your own HIPAA prohibitions against and your own prohibitions against being able to be secure in your person and place, right? Secondarily, you're also being forced to violate and waive your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, because their warnings on their privacy documents say exactly that the information that you submit is, one, subject to review for auditing, law enforcement purposes, and that you're submitting under the penalty of perjury. So right off the bat, you've got one law, a modern law, that tries to go back and change the status of your unalienable laws that are given to you as natural law by God and nature. There's a problem with that. And that is a dichotomy that cannot be resolved except by resorting back to the precedent document of the Constitution. That's where the problem lies. That's why this matters. This is more than just a lie. It's a lie which is effectively nationalizing 1/6 of our economy. It is going to change forever and eternally the relationship between the citizen and the government. It is a violation of their own HIPAA standards against your privacy. It's a violation of your Fourth Amendment right, your Fifth Amendment right. It's also a violation of the Sherman Act, where you are essentially being forced into a non-competitive antitrust violation situation. There's no denying it. You have your choice has been taken away. They can call this competition all they want, but you can call a rabbit a dog, but it doesn't make it a dog. So the truth of the matter is, for those of you who are out there paying attention, you can find this article on the nationalreview.com. It's called If You Can let me just find what it's called. It's on the National Review, and it says, if I like it, you can keep it. In other words, it's a twist on the play of if you want it, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. It says, if I like it, you can keep it. Right? It's a play on words on the National Review. This is the National Review website. It's nationalreview.com. Second one is the National Journal. I know that gets confusing for you for a moment, but it's the National Journal, and this one is entitled Lying About Lies, Why Credibility Matters to Obama. And I even got to take offense to the tone of this the subject matter here, because why credibility matters to Obama? This isn't a function of credibility. This is a function of the president lied to the nation in an attempt to falsify the impression that people had, which changed the entire outcome of a national election. Ladies and gentlemen, the implications of that are huge, and I have to tell you, this is an impeachable offense. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to pick up Defrauding America is all lost under entitlement fraud. This is a serious problem, ladies and gentlemen, and, I'm going to play you a clip from O'Reilly interviewing John Stossel the other day, which was very, very, very eye-opening. In addition to that, excuse me, if you are listening to this via podcast, this will play straight through. Just wait through the break. We'll be right back. If you are watching us on our website streaming live, just hang on a moment. After the break, I pause the video, and it'll come right back on. In about 1 minute, just hit the play button, and you'll have it back live. Okay, you're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm the host here, and you're certainly welcome to find us on all of our web address locations. You can find us at americasvoicenow.org. That's our website. We've got all kinds of articles and stories posted up there. We've got videos of every episode that we do, and we'll shortly have downloadable podcasts posted up there as well. You can find us on facebook.com/America's Voice Now. We ask that you like that page because it helps us to share our message not only with you, but those in your circle of influence. And in addition to that, you can also find this and every other program that we do on video on YouTube, where you can, and you can also find the podcast on YouTube. That can be found by going to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. Stick with us. We're going to take a quick break, and we will return in just a moment. All right, we're back. So, thanks for riding with us. Appreciate you. I'll get all these buttons down, by the way, and I'm a one-man band sitting here trying to manipulate all these buttons. And so, if you're listening to us on our Spreaker podcasting service, just stick with me and ride it out. I'll get better at it, I promise. Complicated to be juggling all these different hats at the same time. Okay, so we covered the issue of the misrepresentation and the outright lies that have been told to the nation by our president. You know, we're swimming in an entitlement sea of debt. And so there was an episode that played last night on O'Reilly where John Stossel was on there. And I like John Stossel in the sense that I like a lot of his ideas. I think he doesn't go far enough. He classifies himself as a libertarian, and yet I've heard him say some very unlibertarian things. So I don't give him 100% of a pass, but he brought out a couple of things about entitlement fraud that are going on here that basically states that 25% of all taxpayer aid to low-income Americans is being misused and abused, and the fraud in programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, food stamps, phone services, welfare, the fraud is so magnificently huge, ladies and gentlemen, that we would literally be able to almost have no deficit whatsoever if we were to eliminate this fraud. We're talking about 25% of the entitlement spending in the United States. You have to recognize that more than $3 trillion of our annual budget is spent on entitlements. In other words, $3 trillion is the amount of our budget, and out of that percentage, we actually spend about $4 trillion, but we've got a deficit of $1 trillion, right? So we've got a total of $3 trillion that is spent on all this other stuff. Out of that $3 trillion, there is at base minimum close to about $1 trillion that is spent on all of these entitlement programs that are being fraudulently tossed around, which means we're talking about $250 billion a year is being spent, or misspent, I should say. And some of the things that he talks about here are quite startling. Stick with me because I want to play you this segment. It's about four minutes long, and I think you'll find it eye-opening, to say the least, and then we'll talk about it a little bit afterwards.
All the tax money that federal and state governments give in entitlements to low-income Americans is misused. Recently, the CBS TV station in Sacramento, California, did an undercover report on food stamp fraud.
Two people, both with the same idea, use Craigslist as free advertising to blatantly and illegally sell their state benefits. Our hidden cameras rolling. A woman we'll call Lori tells our undercover producer about her brilliant idea to game the system for a quick buck.
Everyone said I was crazy, and I was like, I thought people would say to me, oh my God, that's freaking brilliant, man.
And this guy we'll call Joe, rolled up on a skateboard, showing us his CalFresh card he illegally put up for sale on Craigslist.
See, right now it's $116 on it.
Rather than use that $116 for food like he's supposed to, he offers to sell us the card for just $60 cash.
I just need the money right now, and I moved back in the online, so...
He promises to give us his PIN number so we can use his card to buy groceries in any store that accepts EBT cards.
So they don't check ID or anything?
No.
Joe freely admits he's done this before for family and friends, saying, don't worry, we won't get caught. Lori doesn't even think what she's doing is wrong.
I feel justified in what I'm saying and what I'm doing.
She would use the cash for a car to get to work.
I figure it this way. They're already giving me the money, okay?
Here now with more on the fraud problem, the big picture, Fox Business anchor John Stossel. So, you could make an argument, well, there's going to be thugs and thieves everywhere. No system's going to run perfectly. But the stats for Medicare, for example, are just unbelievable on how much money is being wasted.
And the Inspector General just came out with $29 million in drug payments to people illegally in the United States.
What does that mean, $29 million in drug payments?
It means
bogus prescriptions?
Or real prescriptions to people who aren't supposed to be reimbursed for them.
Okay, so people whose income was too high to get it, but they got it anyway.
People who are illegal aliens. Who are not eligible. But more relevant, $23 million for dead patients.
For Medicaid?
Right, Medicare. $25 million for dead doctors. And this,
what? $25 million for dead doctors? What does that mean?
It means the doctor has this book, and he says, okay, I treated someone for Bill O'Reilly disease and put all this in.
Yeah.
Somebody's filling it out for the doctor who has died. And they
so the doctor's dead.
Right.
Somebody's filling out forms that they have saying that he's still alive, treating somebody, and the money rolls in. How do they cash a check in the doctor's name?
They lie about who they are.
So they'd have to have a whole ID worked up.
That $250 billion a year is, we can afford to just toss that away. I mean, when we're talking about that level of fraud, it's more than disturbing. It is outright inexcusable. And many of these administrative agencies who are in charge of this fraud and know about it, and they're the ones who are in charge of, rooting it out and resolving it, don't do so. In fact, they openly acknowledge and admit that it exists, but they refuse to take any action to prohibit it or stop it. To me, that is, a complete betrayal of everything that this nation and the people that we place in charge are supposed to be doing. If you sit there and say to someone, we're going to give you delegated authority to act in a certain manner, and that we explain to them that it is therefore their responsibility to act in a certain manner, that is inexcusable. It is unconscionable that they should be able to allow this fraud to go on, but not take action to prohibit it. And ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you, to me, that is just that's the top of the cake. America is a very, very generous nation. And I think the vast majority of people don't have a problem with helping out those who need help. But I've got to tell you, no one denies that we have a major problem. And yet those people who are, for all intents and purposes, exclusively in charge of rooting out the problem and ending it, refuse to take action. And that is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this. $250 billion a year of Americans' taxpayer money is being squandered. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, when we're talking about that kind of money, we would eliminate the vast majority of all of the budget crunches that we have if we just ferret it out and stop it. But why won't it be stopped? Well, for starters, the people who are actually responsible for it, they don't have a necessity to stop it because they're not charged with being frugally. Well, first of all, there's no profit at the end of the day. They don't run it like a business, right? And secondarily, it's not really their money. They don't have to be answerable to anyone. That's the problem with administrative agencies, is they are 100% unaccountable to anyone. And that is a major problem. You cannot have a nation that is unaccountable, for all intents and purposes, to the taxpayers to the tune of $250 billion a year. I mean, look, that's not a sustainable situation. When you talk about that kind of money, I mean, it's not even, acceptable to even discuss what we're talking about here. So the problem is, as I see it, and I'm going to actually try to do the math here for you real quick, but $250 billion divided by 300,000 million people is $833 per person. So do the math on that. Essentially, for a family of four, you're paying somewhere around $3,300 a year in fraud. That's the cost to every American family, assuming we're talking a family of four. $833 for every man, woman, and child. Now, we know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the total number of taxpayers is actually about a third of that percentage. So do the math. Every taxpayer is responsible for around $2,500 a year in fraud. $2,500 a year. I mean, come on, folks. $200 a month would enable you to buy not a great car, but buy a cheap car. I mean, you could lease a car for $200 a month. So the point is this. When we talk about the total amount of fraud, and you talk about the burden on our society, for every American to be responsible for roughly $200 per month in fraud, every taxpayer, is unconscionable. I don't know what your level of income is. I don't know what the average is nationwide. It's what, $55,000 or something like that. Actually, it's actually down to $52,000. When President Obama took office, it was actually it's dropped $3,600 since he took office per family member. So not only have you seen your income fall $3,600 a year since 2008 when President Obama took office, but you're responsible, and he's not solely responsible for this, but you as a taxpayer are responsible for an additional $2,500 of fraud on top of that. That's insane. You're paying $6,000. You've lost $6,000 a year between fraud and an income collapse since the Obama administration has taken office. Ladies and gentlemen, that's $500 a month. What can you do with $500 a month? I mean, we're talking so far outside the realm of reality at this point that unless we get these entitlements reined in, we are so far outside the scope of where we can, realistically move forward as a country. We are strapped to the gills with debt. And when we talk about this level of fraud, it is inexcusable, unconscionable, and quite frankly, at the point of criminality. It really is. We have reached the point of criminality on behalf of the elected officials who are allegedly supposed to be overseeing our money supply and our national, expenses. I mean, this is just insane. And I can't give. There is no more ability to say, well, let's just investigate it later, or we'll talk about it later. We can't kick this can down the road anymore. To take those numbers and extrapolate that every American taxpayer is responsible for somewhere around $2,500 a year, $200 a month, I find that unconscionable. If you knew that the money was being used appropriately, and don't forget that if it's only 25% of the fraud, right? That means that you're actually spending, if 25% of it is fraud and it's $2,500 a year, that means it's $10,000 a year that you're responsible for totally for entitlements. Holy smokes. And out of that $10,000, fully $2,500 of it is given away to people who are not entitled. Wow. I mean, if that doesn't tell you that we live in and I got to tell you, I no longer look at this as a nanny state. I look at this now as we move forward in time. We are no longer a nanny state. What we are now is we have reached into the area of criminal police state, because this money isn't being. You're not volunteering to give this money up. It is being coerced from you. It is being taken from you by force of police power. And that, ladies and gentlemen, puts us in an entirely different new political light. I can't fathom. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to talk about our third topic, which is nationalizing America. We have nationalized the student loan industry in the United States of America. And I got a couple of problems with that, not the least of which is that it is exactly what antitrust regulation under the Sherman Act is supposed to bar. The Sherman Act is supposed to eliminate monopoly. Well, when the government nationalizes an industry and takes upon itself with taxpayer money all student loans and bars banks and other lenders from being able to make those loans, hey, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't think that is a violation of free enterprise and the free marketplace and the Sherman Act, it's the same thing with the healthcare law. You have to buy insurance, but you have to buy it through the government. And let's stop trying to gild the lily. The real goal of the entire healthcare debacle is really not about healthcare. It's about, and if you think for a moment that the ultimate goal here is to nationalize the healthcare system in the sense that that the government is not ultimately looking for universal payer, well, that's on you. I mean, you're fooling yourself there. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to tackle this topic of the nationalizing of America. Is totalitarianism in sight when we look at some of these examples? I posit the answer yes, but that's just me. I'm going to let you make your own decision. I'm just going to give you some information. Hopefully you'll take that information, go out and do your own investigation with that as your precursor, if you will, and or the kernel, and you'll grow it into some level of fruit that you'll be confident and comfortable, gives you the ability to make an informed decision moving forward. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. You can find us on the web by going to americasvoicenow.org. You can visit us at our Facebook page, and please like it. You help us to expand our influence, and it expands your influence suddenly to a whole new group of friends as well. So please like our Facebook page at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. And then you can also find our YouTube channel at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. We'll be back in just 1 second.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right, welcome back. Thanks for riding with us this morning. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host here. Appreciate you riding with us today. We hope to spur you to seek out and gain knowledge, not that we impart, but we want to make sure that we give you the basic tools that enable you to move forward and gain education and knowledge yourself. Our goal is really just to kind of, trip your trigger, so to speak, so that you say, wow, I didn't know about that. And then you go out and do some homework and research on your own. Do your own due diligence. If you're going to be a critical thinker, and that is an absolute minimum requirement now in our society and in our world, if you're going to be a critical thinker, you have to look at all sides of the coin, right? So my goal is to just bring it to your attention and then allow you to go out there and seek your own answers, and hopefully you'll come up with enough intelligent information that you'll be able to create and formulate an opinion of your own. We never want to adopt someone else's opinion. We always want to formulate our own. If we adopt someone else's, we are, for all intents and purposes, placing ourselves behind the eight ball because, one, we're not in a position to support and defend our position if we really don't understand the foundation of why we have that position. And that's what you'll find, by the way, when you argue a point about one thing or another with a lot of folks, especially the progressive and the liberal group. Their arguments aren't hinged and based on reality and on logic and on reason. And 9 times out of 10, you'll get 1 or 2 paragraphs into the discussion with someone, and then the first thing that will happen is they will immediately descend into the emotional realm. They leave the realm of logic and reason and well-reasoned positions and arguments based upon facts, and they descend into emotion. And the reason they do that is because they don't have a true grasp on the reasons for why they believe what they believe. They've just adopted someone else's opinion as a parrot sitting on their shoulder saying, this is what I believe, this is what I believe. And the truth is, when you scrape away the surface layer, you find that it's hollow. And, you never want to be caught in that position. You always want to be knowledgeable enough about what you believe so that you have a foundational reason for why you believe that. But then you also want to study their positioning so that when you have studied that, You are in a position to know what arguments they're going to come up with, number one. Number two, know why they think that. And then three, be in a position to debunk those arguments. That's as simple as I can make it. Okay, student loan debt owed to the federal government since the federal government took over or nationalized, I should say, the student loan industry in the United States of America, has climbed at a staggering rate, ladies and gentlemen. Since President Obama took office in 2009, the student debt that is currently outstanding, that is owed to the government now, not the total student debt outstanding, but the amount that's actually owed to the government. In other words, that which the taxpayers are responsible for, right? That has climbed by 463%. This is off of a story that is posted out by CNSnews.com. That's Charlie November Sierra News.com. Great website, by the way. I encourage you to get out there and utilize this as one of your sources for information. Because, yes, they're biased, and they're biased in a conservative slant. But I got to tell you, they'll tell you stuff that the mainstream media is not telling anyone. I mean, you know, they're out there lifting up the rug and looking under the corner and finding all the piles of dust and dirt and the dead beetles that nobody wants to talk about in the mainstream ministry of propaganda. So I like their site for that reason. 463% increase since President Obama took office in 2009. And here's the problem. Listen to what the figure is. When he took office, it was $120 billion. Let's just round the numbers. It was $120 billion. Okay? Now, that's a lot of money for the government to be on the hook for. But, you know, in the overall scheme, when we talk about budgets, it's you know, a flea on the elephant's hiney, so to speak, right? But when we talk about what it is now, it is $675 billion. Ladies and gentlemen, that is well over $500 billion and on its way to $750 billion. We taxpayers are on the hook for. That's a stunning increase. I mean, it climbed at a rate of, 1 or 2% over the course of the Bush years, as an example. But when Obama took office and nationalized the student loan program, and he did nationalize it. Let me tell you what they did. If you're not aware of this, you should be. The federal government banned banks from loaning direct on federal student loans. And the only way now that your child or your nephew or niece or grandson or granddaughter or whatever can get a student loan is to apply through the federal government. And this was all part of the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act. It was one of the laws that partially made up Obamacare. And in it, the federal government gave themselves complete control over all federal student loans for education. Period. 100% dictatorial control. Well, I've got a couple of problems with that. For one thing, it is a violation of the principles, and not just the principles, but the legal issues surrounding free trade, and also the Sherman Act. The Sherman Act is an antitrust act that says that nobody can be in a position where they have, a monopoly, if you will, right? Well, you've heard me contend, if you've listened to me for any period of time, you've heard me say it repeatedly. You cannot have a monopoly without government intervention and manipulation in the system, because only the government can create and allow monopolies to, 1, occur, and 2, to flourish. You only have a monopoly when government involvement in the marketplace creates that scenario for a monopoly through legislation. In other words, why is it you can only have one telephone company, one electric provider, one gas provider, just to use those as an example? Why is it that, you are required to buy telephone service from one provider in your marketplace? Now, the government will from time to time say, okay, we're going to deregulate an industry. Remember when they deregulated long distance? You remember when AT&T used to be the only company that you could buy long distance from? That's how they got their start, right? They broke up the Bells. They said, the Bells have a monopoly, and we're going to break up the Bell telephone companies. And that's how you got Southwestern Bell and Bell Atlantic and, Pacific Bell and all these other Bells, right? And they said, okay, so the Bells are going to provide local services. We're going to give AT&T exclusively the long-distance business. And that continued for a decade. AT&T was enriched beyond Bill Gates' wildest dreams. Then they said, okay, we're going to break this up and allow competitors into the marketplace and so forth and so on because we're going to deregulate. Well, with all due respect, you shouldn't have regulated in the first place because by regulation, you also effectively created a scenario where you're in violation of your own Sherman Act. That's the one that makes a monopoly illegal, right? It's allegedly supposed to be pro-competition legislation so that you can't have another Standard Oil. The truth of the matter is the antitrust acts and the antitrust legislation in the United States, while it's called antitrust, like everything else in government, it's a misnomer, it's a euphemism for the exact opposite of what it is. When I say that, I want you to think of the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. Well, is anyone finding this affordable? No. So when you hear a name from government that is used to name an act, almost invariably you can turn it upside down on its head, and now it makes sense to you. And when you talk about the Sherman Act, it's antitrust legislation. What, in fact, it really does is it opens the door for government to pick the winners and losers, and through crony capitalism, choose who the winners are going to be. And they create the monopoly. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a distortion of the free market. It's a distortion of the concepts of free enterprise. And it is why we've never really truly had capitalism in this nation. We've never had it. I mean, laissez-faire capitalism, if you want to look at that, you bring out the word laissez-faire and people start giving you the old, vampire crossed finger thing. Laissez-faire means zero regulation. Completely free market, Wild West. The truth is, we've never actually attempted it. We've never had a scenario where we had true unfettered capitalism and an unfettered free enterprise free market, ever. And free market principles are what made the country great. I mean, free market principles are what helped the United States of America in the last 237 years drag the rest of the world, and I'll grant you this is a bold statement, but we've dragged the rest of the world kicking and screaming out of the Stone Age. So how can it be bad? But what we don't have is true free enterprise and capitalism. We have this distorted quasi-free marketplace. And it's distorted because the government, it's like taking a bubble, right? If you could take a balloon and you put your finger, a balloon is a perfect sphere because, assuming that the rubber around it is all uniform in thickness and so forth, that balloon is a perfect sphere. Okay. If you take your finger and you hold a balloon and you insert and push your finger, you distort the shape of the sphere. And government intervention through antitrust oxymoronish type programs like the Sherman Act actually distort the marketplace. And this is no different. So now what we have is a government who is, for all intents and purposes, eliminated a significant chunk of the marketplace from the free market. The government is now in charge of all student loans. You cannot apply for a student loan unless you go through the federal government. Hey, folks, if that's not hijacking a big, significant chunk of the economy, I don't know what is. Now, there are those who will say, well, that's not true. You can still go to a bank and get a loan. That's right. You could go to a bank if you're well-heeled enough and say, listen, Bob, you and I have been friends for 20 years. I got a lot of money in your bank. I do a lot of business with you. I need a student loan to get my kid into Harvard or Yale or Brown or whatever other university he's going to go to. And I don't want to go through the federal government. I just want to get a loan from you because you're my local banker. And he says, great. If you want to sign on it personally, we'll give you the loan. But that's different than a student who says, hey, I'm doing this on my own. I'm just graduating high school, and I need a student loan to go on to college. So what we have is a government that has completely distorted the free market and free enterprise. And they've done it in repeated areas, but this particular one is egregious because our debt, the debt that we as taxpayers are on the hook for, has grown 463% in 5 years. No, I'm sorry, even less than that, 4 years. Now, the direct student loan program is what this is called. And it went into effect, actually, July 1 in 2010. So it's, 3 years, really? It's even less than that. At that time, the amount of outstanding loans was $178,000 and some change. Let's call it 178,000. $178 billion. Now, for the record, it is, put your socks on, $675 billion. I mean, that's just the way that this program works is the federal government is the banker, and it's like a monopoly game. There's only one banker to go to. It provides the loans that students obtain, and it still requires all the same stuff that your family sign on for it, and if you don't have enough credit and all that kind of thing. But it uses federal monies from the Treasury, and which of course taxpayers are required to cough up. And it actually owns those loans. Now, arguably, some would say, well, that puts the government in charge of business. It's a good thing. We're getting interest on that. Stop right there. Has the government ever fiscally managed your money correctly? Do you expect that today they're going to start? I mean, realistically, they don't operate like a business. They don't manage and maintain their books like a business. If they did, they would be required to utilize the same principles, the same accounting principles that every company in the nation is required legally to abide by. Generally accepted accounting principles, that's GAAP, right? Generally accepted accounting principles are the principles that every corporation on the planet must adhere to maintain their books. Yet the federal government refuses staunchly to follow GAAP. Why is that? And how is it that you, as an accountant or a corporation or an owner of a business who decides to play, let's play double books, can go to jail for that, but the government can't? And you don't have the police power to nationalize your entire marketplace. This is why we are sliding in towards totalitarianism in this nation. And it's incremental in its scope and in its scale. It's always like the frog boiling in the pot, right? You know the old adage, you got a pot there, it's at room temperature, you toss a frog in there, and he sits there happily and croaks away. And you turn the heat on, and you turn it on very low, and slowly but surely the water heats up. And because the frog doesn't have the ability to sense that the water is heating up around him, he stays in there until he boils. On the other hand, if the water was already boiling and you whip the frog in there, he'd jump right out again, because he'd recognize instantaneously that it was hot. But under a graduated scenario, he never quite recognizes what's happening to him until it's too late. When we look at the nationalizing of entire areas of our economy, when we look at the nationalizing of federal land, right? How about the Bureau of Land Management? They own, unbelievable percentages of the United States. It's like, 40% or something like that. I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head. You can look them up yourself. But, and on that property is what? A lot of natural resources. So now the government is in the position of being the holder and the owner of all these natural resources that, guess what? They won't let anybody go drill on. Why are we buying oil from OPEC? Because the government says you can't drill on this. It's another distortion of the free market. If that land was in private hands, a company would be able to go over to the landowner and say, hey, you got 1,000 acres out there. Maybe you got 10,000 acres out there. You got a lot of oil and natural gas under there. I'd like to tap into it, and I'll cut you in for a slice of the profits. What do you say? And the government, when you approach them with that same perspective, they say, oh, no, not really. We're not going to go there. And you don't have any choice or even discussion in the matter. There's no way you can appeal to them because it's a policy decision. It's not a question motivated by profitability for a private landowner. The same applies when we're talking about the nationalization of our student loan scenario. First of all, you took the profit away from banks. And I'm no friend of banks. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. But I am saying that there was a profit that ended up going back into the economy that now does not, number one. Number two, because government does not operate on the same principles as industry and the public, they're not accountable for the money. So they don't really care whether the student ever pays it back or not. Because, hey, you know what? The taxpayers are going to pay it. It's all just Treasury money. Don't worry about it. And they are that flippant about it. Trust me. The fact that in our last segment, we just covered that $250 billion a year is lost to fraud and abuse out of our entitlement programs tells you everything you need to know. 25%. I mean, that's staggering. Out of $1 trillion a year, which we spend on entitlement programs for Medicare and Medicaid and whatever, Social Security, welfare, not Social Security. Stop. It's not part of it. But Medicare and Medicaid and welfare and all the rest, we're talking about $250 billion a year lost. I just did the math. That's $2,500 per taxpayer per year. So we're on the hook for this. Not to mention the fact that you've isolated an entire industry, quite honestly. It's an entire industry. Make no mistake about it. The student loan industry was an industry into itself. And it also does one other aspect of this, which is damaging to the society and the fabric of our nation. It gives government the approval, the ability to say it's okay going forward to isolate and annex in to government's control other segments of the economy. In other words, it's like the old adage that, the first murder is the difficult one, but after that, they all get easy kind of thing. The problem that we have here is that direct loan financing should not be a perspective should not be a government-owned entity, and it is totalitarianism. It's nationalizing the system. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it socialism. You can call it communism. You can call it fascism. I don't care what ism you label it with. When you talk about the government taking over entire segments of the economy, it is a totalitarianistic or authoritarianistic element, period. And there's no other way to look at it. The fact that they did this successfully, according to them, on the student loan aspect was one of the things and one of the motivators for them to do it on the healthcare aspect, where we're not talking about now a small sliver of a percentage lost in the overall budget. Here we're talking about a whole sixth of the American economy. 1/6 of a $16 trillion economy has been completely removed. And mark my words, when the move comes to go to single payer, and it will come, it will get to universal health care. I mean, I can give you documented examples of Obama stating that back as far as 2003, long before he ever had presidential, he probably had presidential aspirations, but long before he was ever a gleam in the presidential eye of anyone, he was saying back then that he approved of the idea of universal single payer healthcare systems, where government is equivalent to the one and only stop, the one and only banker on the monopoly table. So we know that's the goal, and we've heard Congress people say that right out boldly. What we have is a frog boiling in the pot. It's a little here, it's a little there. And we are sliding into totalitarianism. Now when you combine that with some other things that are coming out, the education system. I'm going to talk about that next when we talk about debunking Common Core. But mark my words, Common Core is a federal program. And already the Department of Education in Washington, which has by the way, ladies and gentlemen, a $100 billion a year budget. $100 billion. Where does that money come from? It comes from the individual states. The Department of Education gets it. They scrape their percentage off the top in true gangland thug style, and then they distribute it back to the states with a lot of mandates associated to it. How insane is that? When you look at it from that perspective, when you step back from the forest and you get above the trees, you can see the lay of the land. We're in danger. Our nation is in exigent danger of sliding into authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And I cannot encourage you strongly enough to educate yourself about what our real true motives and intentions were in the founding and the designation of this country as a constitutional republic. Because a constitutional republic declares that government must be small in order for the people to yield big. And the entire dichotomy has been turned on its head. The entire picture has been flipped in a dichotomy that changes the nature. This healthcare bill changes your role and your relationship to government. You are no longer the master. You are now subservient. And that's exactly how the globalists, the elitists, and the political class want it. They want you subservient to them. That can never be acceptable to America. It cannot be. Congress has no right to make a law that is outside the constitutional authorities granted and delegated to Congress by the states and the people themselves. The Obamacare compels every citizen to engage in commerce. You're compelled. You don't have a choice. It's done by the police power of the government. Well, I got to tell you something. John Adams made a very, very astute quote, and I'm going to read it to you. If men, through fear, fraud, or mistake, should in terms renounce and give up any essential natural right, the eternal law of reason and the great end of society would absolutely vacate such a renunciation. And the right to freedom, being the gift of God Almighty, it is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave. Wow. Let's paraphrase that for a moment, just so we get away from some of the old English. If men are coerced through fear, fraud, or mistake, and renounce or give up any of their essential natural rights, the eternal laws of reason mean that they later, upon discovering that they have renounced that right, have the right to vacate that renunciation and say, stop, I was tricked. The terms of the contract were not as originally presented to me. And therefore, my right to freedom, being an unalienable gift of God and nature, says that I have it within my power as man to alienate this gift, to alienate this contract and to remove myself voluntarily from the position of slavery. Boom. If men, through fear, coercion, right, fraud or mistake, should in terms renounce and give up any essential natural right, the eternal law of reason and the great end of society would absolutely vacate such a renunciation. The right to freedom being the gift of Almighty God, it is not in the power of man to voluntarily become a slave. Hey, folks, it's this simple. We have the unalienable rights that all humans have. It's not just limited to those people in the United States, by the way. Everyone has the rights of free speech and the rights of self-defense and the rights to pursue your own life in the way in which you choose and to benefit from the fruit of your labor. The only difference between us and them is we have actually ensconced this into a document that gives us some guidance, some boundaries, right? In other words, it's like, canyon walls. And we can stay within these canyon walls and know that we're safe as long as we don't venture off the trail of the constitutional guideposts. But we've been tricked, we've been manipulated, and we have been coerced into giving up those rights which we don't even have the right to give up. We cannot waive them. You can waive them in a piece of paper, but you cannot universally, in a universal sense of things, you cannot waive your right and voluntarily enter into slavery. And if you do, and it's done via fraud, fear, coercion, or a mistake, you have the right to extricate yourself from that position, declare your liberty and your freedom, and go back to the unalienable rights of freedom, liberty, and truth. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a powerful concept. This is our country. This is our nation. And we have a right to put it back the way it should be, to put the pieces back in place. John Adams wrote that in 1772, called Rights of the Colonists. This is before 1776 now. If men through fear, fraud, or mistake should in terms renounce or give up any essential natural right, the eternal law of reason and the great end of society would absolutely vacate such renunciation. The right to freedom being the gift of Almighty God, it is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave. Holy smoke. That's like getting punched right in the jaw. All right, we're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to talk about Common Core. Because the claims out there from the 46 states who have signed on for Common Core is that they're trying to get it passed. I mean, the national uprising over Common Core, if you're not aware of it, is huge. And the states are out there saying, well, this is a state-led effort. It's really not a national effort. Bunk. Don't buy it for a second. It is an absolute lie being perpetrated upon you. Like we just talked about, it's the frog on the pot mentality. The federal government is already in charge of all nationalized education. And I got to tell you, they're unconstitutionally usurping that authority. It doesn't belong to the federal government. It belongs to the states, and it belongs to the individuals. We're going to cover that in a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. You can find us on the web by going to americasvoicenow.org. And then you can also find us on our Facebook page. I strongly ask you to go to our Facebook page because when you do that, it gives us an opportunity to, and you hit the like button. When we post stuff up there, it gets posted onto your timeline, and then people on your sphere of influence can read it. Well, one way that you can share your knowledge and education and help influence those people are in your own personal circle of influence is by simply liking our Facebook page. Because when we post an article or a story up there, it shows up on your timeline. You never know who in your circle is going to say, wow, that's interesting. Let me click on that and find out what that's all about. Boom. We just brought another person to awakening. And that's what our job is. That's what we're here for. To bring others to awakening and awareness. We have an obligation to do that. We'll be right back. We're going to return in just a moment. If you're catching us on our audio podcast, stick with us. We're just going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. If you're watching us live on the web, We'll take a quick break. We'll pause the video for a moment and wait 30 seconds and then hit the play button, and you'll be able to pick it up where you left off. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Find us on Facebook.com/America's Voice Now, YouTube.com/America's Voice Now. You can share those videos with your friends as well. And you can also find our website directly where we post everything up there, and that is americasvoicenow.org. We'll be right back. Boom, shakalaka-laka. All right. We're back. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Thanks for riding with us today. We're back in the saddle. Last segment. And we are going to touch on a touchy subject. Common Core. If you're not familiar with Common Core, you ought to be. It's a pretty dangerous program. It is a program that is misunderstood, given a pass when it shouldn't be, and it is just another example of the creeping illness, the virus of totalitarianism slipping slowly about us and gathering us up, annexing us in. I draw the analogy to, you remember that movie? I'm going to date myself right now, but you remember there was a movie out there called The Blob. It had Steve McQueen in it. I can't think of the woman's name, but basically this thing landed from space. And I've used this analogy before, so if you're a long-time listener, just live with me. This thing landed and it from space, and it fell out of a cocoon or some stupid thing. I can't remember. It was in the 60s. And it was about the size of a marble, and it ate an ant, and then, it grew a little bit, and then it ate a grasshopper, and then it ate a mouse, but slowly but surely this thing is growing and growing and growing and growing. Soon it's eating cattle, and it's eating people, and so forth and so on. And towards the tail end of the movie, the climax of it is McQueen and this woman are inside of this bowling alley, and this thing is so big, it's enveloped the entire building now, and it's oozing in the windows. It was just The Blob, right? One of them campy horror movies that you watched on Chiller Theater, where a six-fingered hand came out of the ground. Anyway, I digress. The point is, where we are sliding into, and this goes back to my earlier segment about totalitarianism, is we are sliding and being slowly but surely absorbed, like the blob. It just surrounds you and absorbs you. And, every aspect of our society, our free enterprise marketplace, our educational system, the changes that are being instituted in the fabric of our society and our belief system, the destruction of those things which so many people construe and consider to be sacred, the issue of marriage, the issue of abortions, the issue of immigration and sovereignty of our borders, and all of those types of issues. Slowly but surely, you're being manipulated into accepting a pre-decided upon, pre-agreed positioning you don't want. You're not even really given the choice. In other words, it's fostered upon you, and you're told that under threat of force and coercion of police power, you're going to accept this. Perfect example is Obamacare. Another example is the student loan thing we just talked about. When government annexes out industry and puts itself in place, it captures one more of the elements of our society. And now our education system, which has long been under attack by a national agency, which is unconstitutional in its face, is now instituting these Common Core education standards. And I got to tell you, there is a tidal wave of people that are upset about this nationwide. School boards are getting beaten to death over this by citizenry. And yet they're standing there and they're giving the false assumption that this is all state-led stuff. It has nothing to do with we've taken the principles of Common Core and we've modified them to fit our state. Lie. Flat out, bald-faced lie. And I'm going to tell you something. If you are of a moderate to conservative position and viewpoint of history and all those types of things, I got to tell you, you ought to read one of your kids' textbooks. You're going to be doing cartwheels by the end of it. This is so far to the progressive and the leftist and liberal mindset that the indoctrination that our children are getting in public schools is essentially teaching them to be these indoctrinated little good boys and girls who never question authority and do exactly as they're told. And I got to tell you, that's the truth. Ask your kids what they're learning in school. Why don't you take the time to go out there and do a little quiz. Just write a pop quiz about some stuff that you know from history. Go out and do your homework to make sure you're formulating the questions correctly. But this should be stuff every kid ought to know. And then I want you to sit down with your kid and ask them, him or her, to answer that pop quiz. Make it 5 or 10 or 20 questions. And if you're afraid to do it in a formal setting, just every once in a while, when they come home from school, say, what about this question in history? Have you learned that yet? And hear what they have to say. Make sure it's age appropriate for their period in school. You obviously, you don't want to ask them a question that would be above their grade level. But you're going to find some astounding information. And I suspect that what you're going to find is some frightening information. You're going to realize how far down the rabbit hole our education system has fallen. And the reason it's fallen down there is because we have lost control of it on a local level. Now, the argument that they will give you is, but these are national standards, so every child is equal in terms of their knowledge. Well, let me ask you a question. We have seen over the past couple of decades the slide in the standing of American education system to, I think we are ranked 23 globally. Yes, you heard me right. 23 is our international ranking for education quality. So, I got to ask you, how good a job are they really doing here? Are they doing a good job? Or is this all just more opportunity for the government to indoctrinate our children to the point where they are not critically thinking, they are not independent thinking, they have no level or no concept of individuality. They are just a part of the collective, absorbed into the blob, if you will. That's exactly what we're experiencing. And listen, if federal government was doing such a good job at education, why are we 23? If Arne Duncan, who, by the way, he's the head of the National National Department of Education, the guy is, listen, I know I'm going to get some hate mail about this, but he's gay, first and foremost, which I couldn't care less about. I don't care who you sleep with. That's entirely up to you. You do what you want to do. Just don't force it down my throat. But what I do have a problem with is a pamphlet that he printed up that teaches kids as young as 8th graders and freshmen in high school about how they can explore the gay lifestyle. And that I got a problem with. I don't think that's an educator's job to enter into the sexual thinking of our children and offer them an alternative that they ordinarily may or may not have a predilection for in the first place. If you have gay thoughts when you're that's fine, whatever you want to do. I don't agree with it, but listen, everybody's different, right? And it's not my place to tell you what to think or how to think or anything else. I think a lot of it is fad-based anyway. But the point is this. When your child is given a pamphlet, and you can bet your bottom dollar they didn't get your approval about this, that talks about things like fisting, I got a problem with that. talks about places where kids, and it's called the Little Black Book. You can look it up on the internet. Arne Duncan, A-R-N-E, Duncan, D-U-N-C-A-N, head of the National Department of Education, DOE, call themselves. That's also the Department of Energy. It's a little confusing. Anyway, Arne Duncan was behind the publication of this little pamphlet. It was 13 pages. And it talks about, how not to get AIDS and in the gay lifestyle and all that stuff. My point is that the progressive indoctrination is continuing in a format and in a method that is completely unacceptable. Yesterday I posted something up on our Facebook page about how a gay sex pundit was paid $24,000 to come in and do a speech to students at a university, and the topic was fisting, anal fisting. If you don't know what that is, go look it up. I don't want to get into it on the show. But it also talked about gorilla suit fetishes. And the guy who did it is a gay pundit, so he's a gay sex educator. So, of course, everything leaned towards the gay side. Well, the outrage is, guess what? The taxpayers paid for that. It's a publicly funded university. $24,000? Are you out of your mind? I mean, look, I don't care what you do or whom you do it with. But I tell you right now, as taxpayers, every one of us should be outraged that we are being abused, we are being beaten with this indoctrination hammer. And you know what? That money that he was paid is being taken out of the mouths of your children to pay for these things that we don't agree with. It's criminal malfeasance, and it's embezzlement of public money. And it's nothing less. And this Common Core is just the same stuff. Now, I grant you, they're not getting into the sex education aspect, but what they are is they are doing selective rewriting of history. And they are, rewriting all of the standards of all of our social interactions. And everything is all about globalism. And everything is all about open borders. And everything is all about the open acceptance of and the idea that, nobody can be, everything is PC. Well, let me tell you what the truth is. They'll try to tell you in your home state, if you go to a school board meeting, the first thing they'll say to you is, well, wait a second, we haven't adopted Common Core. We've adopted a state version. The principles of Common Core are this, as fundamentally outlined, is that a kid can, whether they grow up in Miami or whether they grow up in Seattle or they grow up in Bent Elbow Dirt Road, Louisiana, they've all pretty much got the same education at 8th grade, 10th grade, 11th, whatever, right? And that they're uniformly meeting those targets so that if a kid transfers from Miami to Bent Elbow Dirt Road, Louisiana, he's going to step into a relatively similar classroom situation in terms of his abilities for math and science and so forth and history. Well, there's a veteran educator, a woman by the name of Mary Black, and she has come out and written some rather excoriating and scathing information about this. She's actually put out a video about the national standards part of this, and she explains that state governments and citizens had nothing to do with the development and the rollout of this controversial game. This thing is being pitched at us as if it's all about state-led concepts. Well, let me tell you who's really behind it. It's dangerous stuff. The real origins of this program are the National Governors Association, the Council of the Chief State of School Officers, and Achieve Incorporated. Now, Achieve is a company that is pushing and promoting this, and they are the ones who are, claiming that this is a state-led effort. We'll stop right there. The National Governors Association and the Council on Chief State School Officers are trade organizations that are lobbying organizations based in Washington, D.C. They're trade associations. They're no different than the ACL or AFL-CIO or one of the, they're not a union, but they're no different than a lobbying organization and a trade association like the U.S. Department of Commerce, Chamber of Commerce. They have no business in the education game at all. The National Governors Association? Come on. They're not even based in the states that they claim to be representing. So, when we fought the Blue Ways a couple months back, one of the things that the government told us, the Blue Ways, if you don't know what that is, look it up on the internet. It's Blue Ways. It was the Department of Interior trying to abscond off with the control of 18 million acres in Arkansas and Missouri. They wanted dictatorial control over it. And one of the things that they kept pushing forth is the stakeholders agreed that it would be a good thing for the Department of the Interior to have control of all this land. Well, when we actually began to look into the stakeholders, they were organizations and groups that weren't here. In fact, many of them weren't even in the United States. They were international. They received all this leftist and progressive money from George Soros and groups like that. It was like the Nature Conservancy, right? And the Audubon Society. And all of these, ultra-left, what they want to do is turn that whole 18 million acres into a national preserve and allow wildlife to grow wild again and kick all the people out. Well, these stakeholders had never even been here. And this is the same deal. These people are the alleged stakeholders. But they're not in your community. They're not in your state. They're based out of Washington, D.C., where they walk around in $1,000 suits with $300 pairs of shoes, driving a Mercedes or taking a limo to work. Now, you tell me how that justifies them having an input on what your child is indoctrinated with in school. The truth of the matter is, it gets even worse. These are two non-governmental or NGOs. Anytime you hear the word non-governmental organization or an NGO, watch out. Watch your wallet and watch your spirit and your heart, because these groups are almost, for the majority of them, there's a couple of good ones out there, but the vast majority of these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are nanny state busybodies who want everything to do about your control, but don't have any real consideration for what you, who and what, and your circumstances or anything else. They've got an agenda, and you're just livestock to be shuttled around. Achieve is an education-related group that is responsible for creating the standards that are applied in Common Core. Guess what? Guess who's really behind a lot of this? Bill and Melinda Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, I got to tell you, when I first started to learn about Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I was actually a little impressed with them, because they were going out there and they were spending their own fortune, which is obviously very considerable, and they were doing stuff like immunizing kids around the world, and I thought, well, that was pretty altruistic of them. But the more I learn about Bill Gates and Melinda Gates and their foundation, the less I like what they're actually doing. This is a group that is entrenched in this globalist philosophy. And what I find even more disturbing about it is that with the money that the Gateses have put into this and the Achieve Incorporated, remember, let me tell you who Achieve was created by. The founders are all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And that, ladies and gentlemen, ought to tell you almost everything you need to know. The founders of Achieve Incorporated, and it is a foundation. It's Achieve Foundation, right? So it's a not-for-profit and whatever. But here's the deal. The founders of the group and most of their board members are all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Their chairman is actually a Bilderberg Summit attendee. And he wrote a column in the Wall Street Journal some time back in which he actually advocated, quote, abolish all local school districts, establish a set of national standards for a core curriculum, that's where the name Common Core comes from, and that he wanted to, that they wanted this organization to Achieve to represent the states. And this group has received over $30 million from the Gates Foundation. to implement their dream of Common Core. Well, I got to tell you, that's a problem. These guys who are behind this, and Arne Duncan, I brought you to, him to your attention earlier. Arne Duncan is as the head of Department of Education. He's been crucial in bribing and bullying the states with federal money to get them to acquiesce to this. You know, they use coercion and corruption and misappropriation, frankly, of taxpayer money to get states to agree with their policies and procedures. And so they go in there and they say, well, if you don't apply this, then we're going to withhold something else from you that you desperately need. Well, guess what? Ms. Black comes out with a statement which is crucial to the understanding of going forward. At a press conference, when the idea of Common Core was released, Duncan threw his absolute full-hearted support behind a set of national standards. And he's been caught bragging to the United Nations and other organizations about his reform scheme. We're paying tens of billions of dollars in grants that are being used to bribe and manipulate and coerce state officials into accepting these Common Core standards. And these bribes are coming through stimulus funds. You remember the $787 billion TARP and all the stimulus money that came about when Obama first took office? That's where it's all coming from. These are slush funds for black ops projects that aren't military in their nature. They are designed to excoriate and destroy the fabric and the framework of our society and rebuild it in this new envisioned model of fundamental transformation. Well, I got to tell you, it's not state-led. It's national. It's globalist. It's indoctrination. It's intimidation. And your children's minds are there's a virus, like a computer virus, being installed in your child's hard drive. Okay? This is how you need to understand it. This Common Core concept and the entire curriculum is a virus, and it's being installed in your son or daughter's hard drive. You ever try to get one out of your computer? I rest my case, counselor. What you are seeing is the wholesale manipulation and indoctrination of our youth into these mind-numbing zombies who will walk around and do exactly as they're told, never question authority, never ask, never say, well, wait a second, I don't agree with that. I had a guy on our Facebook page. He's a listener, a steady listener, and he went in to vote yesterday in Virginia. You know what he saw on a sign in the elementary school cafeteria? This is a quote. I will accept consequences without arguing. Wow. I will accept consequences without arguing. So basically, do the critical thinking on that statement for a moment. You're going to accept the consequences of what? I mean, if the teacher is wrong and wrongly accused the student of some infraction, the child has to accept those consequences without arguing. Is this any different than the sign on the wall that says obey? No, it isn't. And this is what our children are being taught. This is propaganda that guys like Goebbels would be proud of. There is not a whole lot of difference, ladies and gentlemen. This is the same kind of crap that the Hitler Youth were fed. Your superiority, your brilliance, your self-esteem is pumped up. You get the good, warm, flow and feeling as your endorphins kick in, your mental endorphins. But the truth of the matter is, our nation is being let down dramatically. Our education has faltered. Our kids are not coming out with critical thinking skills. They're not even coming out with basic math, history, and science skills. I mean, we're 23rd in the world. What does that tell you? If this was so dad-blamed good, why are we 23? Well, this is going to improve it. No, that's what you said the last 9 crazy schemes ago. It didn't improve it for any of those 9 crazy schemes, and it's not going to improve it for this crazy scheme. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to make a change, get on your school board. Run for school board. If you've got children in school, get on the school board or get your kids out of school and put them into homeschooling. I got to work 2 jobs. Then get collectively together with a few other parents in your community and put together a home school. And each of you go to a 4-day work week, and each of you work as a teacher for 5 days out of the week. I don't know what to tell you, but you better do something. Because I'm here to tell you, your children are being raised beneath you as automatons. And they will be the destruction of this nation. Those are the ones we're trying to hand off the torch of liberty to. And they don't even recognize it for what it is. We're handing them the pot of gold of liberty. And they look at it and say, what do I want that for? You've been listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I appreciate you riding with us this morning. Thank you very much. If you're catching us on our YouTube channel or on our podcast, this is our last segment. You'll be able to get these podcasts and download every show now as a single podcast all day long, just because it's easier to do that than try to break it up into 4 segments. Our YouTube videos will continue to be broken into 4 segments. I'll pause the camera in between each one. Okay, thanks for joining with us. Please visit our website at americasvoicenow.org. You can find all kinds of information there that is vital to your knowledge and education and your critical thinking. You can find all kinds of news stories there and sources for you to be able to find stuff that the Ministry of Propaganda is not telling you about, and they're sweeping it under the rug. Make sure that you're doing some homework and due diligence. Ladies and gentlemen, the core message here every day is simply this. It's up to us. We are in the last-ditch effort to try to save ourselves. We are 100% surrounded by the enemy. The enemy is this concept of globalization and the fact that, you are supposed to sacrifice yourself on the altar of altruism. I got to tell you, that's not a good thing. So stick with us. You're certainly welcome to participate with us. You can find our website at americasvoicenow.org. We encourage you to join with us there. You can find us on Facebook. Please like our Facebook page. It helps us to share our message with you and your sphere of influence on a personal level. And then you can find every video and podcast that we do up on YouTube as well. Thanks so much for being with us today. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Remember, folks, if it's up to change in this country, it's up to each one of us, right? We don't have an option to wait anymore and wait for somebody to ride up on a white horse and save us from ourselves. It's up to us and only us. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is when good men do nothing. Where do you stand? Have a great day.